All right, welcome to the StrongFirst YouTube channel. I'm Brett Jones, StrongFirst Director of Education and Master Instructor, and I am honored today to be joined by two individuals that have accomplished something that just over 220 people on the planet have ever accomplished, the lifting of the legendary Dinnie Stones. And that is Jason Marshall, StrongFirst Certified Master Instructor, and John Odden, StrongFirst Elite Instructor. And gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Thanks for having us, Brett.
Thank you.
So let's go 33-floor elevator speech intros. Jason, introduce yourself, please.
All right, 33 floors. That's a long time.
Oh my gosh, did I say 33?
That's okay. I get it. So Jason Marshall, I'm a StrongFirst Master Instructor, been involved with the organization since 2007 and have been fortunate enough to get to travel around and see a little bit of the world and teach various groups. Before that, I was into strength training and powerlifting and always athletic, and I also have a family heritage that goes back to Scotland, Ireland, and I've always been interested in that culture and wanted to, at some point, if the time was right and the opportunity came up, to get to experience some of that culture, and was able to do that in 2019 and get to see and touch and successfully lift the Dinnie Stones.
That's awesome. John.
Yeah, I've been a lifelong strength enthusiast and just always fascinated by the physical culture, and just decided to get my my bachelor's degree in exercise science. I knew that would be a great foundation to build from, and worked for a smaller hospital and was also a strength coach. We got a robust kind of variety of different things, and Jason and I have that in common with cardiac rehab, I remember, as our theme too. And had kind of roped into doing the Scottish Highland Game, just looking for something different to do with my training. This was right before I had found the kettlebell, actually, too, like 2004, and just really fell in love with the games and just kept progressing from there. And the Dinnie Stones were just something I had heard of, all that mysticism and information. And then the Rogue Strongland and Stoneland came out. And that just completely lit me up, seeing that and starting to follow Jan Todd and some of this physical culture historian stuff that I know you both have some interest and background in, obviously, too. But it just really grew from there. It just seemed fitting before, not that it necessarily is too late, but at some point it is too late. And I was heading into my later 30s, and I had the opportunity to go to Scotland. That was actually my second year. I'd got some exposure the first year there, competing as my kind of later days in my professional career there, and Scotland was on that list, and had dabbled with some of the stones and been connected with some of the stones. And then the Dinnies kind of came up front and center the next summer. Like, now is the time. I have to go for this. So thankfully it all came together when it was meant to.
Awesome. And now we're in a situation where Sven Reiger, also StrongFirst Elite Instructor and country leader for Germany, has also successfully lifted the stones. And we've published his first article. We have a second one coming up. And I'm going to kind of go maybe in a reverse order for this beginning of this interview, because we're going to talk about how you trained for the stones and what the experience was. And, we'll get there. But having looked at Sven's article and now being 4 years down the road from having successfully lifted the stones, what are your reflections? What did the article bring to mind for you, or what are your reflections on that experience, Jason?
I just constantly feel, well, one thing is, I don't know that the average person understands what the achievement was, or what it means to somebody, people like us, that are kind of strength nerds, and maybe like the history and the background and the culture of strength training and the culture. So, even when I tell my family or they ask about it, it's kind of like goes over their head. But anytime I'm around, a StrongFirst group, or, it's really cool to see their eyes light up and they understand it, especially if they've seen the Rogue documentary. I think really propelled this thing forward, and got a lot of popularity around it. And there's been a lot more interest in this kind of thing, so it's kind of cool to be part of that. And anytime a friend like Sven, I know we've got another guy in our organization, Brett Bracken, who did it, I believe, last year at the Donald Denny Games. So anytime I get to see that and the torches handed off and passed down, and it's like other guys are doing this and they're coming to us for advice and asking some of the same things that we were asking. And I had a few people that I was relying on. I remember asking John a bunch of questions because he had just done it beforehand. It's just really cool that we all kind of lean on each other to do this one thing, and it's cool that all of our hands have been placed on the same set of rings and tried to. We know what it feels like, and that's really cool that Sven has gotten the chance to share that story. So it's just encouraging and exciting, and gives me fond fuzzies, warm fuzzies anytime I get to hear about it. So
I love it. And that makes me, I did not realize that Brett had Bracken, not this Brett, but Brett Bracken had done it as well. So I foresee a second interview coming up with Brett and Sven. So John, what are your reflections?
Oh, just same kind of theme, of course, not to totally piggyback or steal Jason's flow there too, but just seeing the growth, having been, and there was so many before us, not that it really matters when and how and who did things too, but it's a little bit more, I guess, raw for me in some ways. I didn't have quite as much information. And it's kind of like when I started the Highland Games, I can tell we didn't have YouTube, or we didn't have this instant access potentially to good people. And, just that gratitude of that growth, kind of feeling a little bit like, I was maybe able to help inspire a little bit along the way, and seeing, hopefully it was a little bit maybe smoother in the training process for Sven. As we go, hopefully we can smooth things out, but obviously it's a raw, gritty lift too. So it's like, you don't want to be over prepared, or you want to walk in there. And that really resonated with me when he was talking about being extremely confident that he was going to go lift them. And then he had that little slip. And I know exactly what that feels like when you go and completely execute as you had hoped and planned, or really, mapped out in your mind very intensely. And then sometimes when things don't go how you can persevere and go to plan B, and it's outside, and I think there was a little rain the morning of my lift, and it's not this perfectly set up, not that anything, we all know that from competition settings and certifications and everything too, perfectly imperfect, but that's what I guess is really that it is raw. But we were able to hopefully, who wants to go over there and have these doubts, if we can disperse some of that a little bit too, and give that little wind in the sail. So hopefully I was able to do that, maybe a little bit with Jason too, but especially with Sven too, to say, hey, you got this. Here's your gym lifts. Here's all the pieces. You have the now the handles are so much better. I was having to, I know Jason probably has a similar story if I remember right too, with just putting how do we get the right handle size? And I can be extremely detail oriented, and I want to replicate everything perfectly in this lab sterile setting. And then I'm also, just pick up the stones. We're just standing up underneath this load, and it's kind of like two big kettlebells in a sense too. It's kind of cool to think of, maybe that gives somebody a reference of 420 pounds, I think, and 314, if I remember correctly, for a total of 34 pounds, depending on who's doing the weighing that day. And, playing around with different weights. I know we'll get into that too, of what, how do we train for this and know that we're going to go over there and do this thing on this day that we have it scheduled. And people maybe should know that too, that it's a scheduled lift. You have to get approval. You have to have all of the powers that be that do this. It's not it's a certificate that you get. You've done that correctly on that day, and they unlock the stones and take them out for you and all that too, or not take them out, but they unlock the chain there at the Potark Cafe. So it's a fairly formal kind of thing, and there's a few people around, which definitely helps. It's not fun to wake up in the morning and, okay, we're gonna just go walk in and pick up these these things cold. There's not, I've heard all that too. People will bring all their equipment out and their bands and their bells and whatever. And I didn't have that opportunity. It's just the raw stone, like practice on one of the stones for your warm-ups and do a few other movement patterns and just give them your best. That's what it comes down to. Very raw, I guess, my overarching feeling there too.
And to provide just a little bit of audio context, I mean, you can go, we'll have pictures and, there's pictures in Sven's articles and you can put some visuals to this, but we're talking about an asymmetrical stance with an asymmetrical load with rings that are, shall we say, uncomfortable on the hands and grip. It is a unique lift, period. And to your point of, now you can get rings and you can get the plate loaded things and you can practice the lift. And so there's a little more context than maybe to your point of in years past, but like nobody trains an asymmetrical stance, asymmetrical load, ring based deadlift. And so it is way out of the context of to Jason's point of like, even his family who knows he's accomplished this thing don't really understand what he accomplished. I've lifted enough things over the years to where I look at this lift and go, my mind's just blown when I think about this. So let's go there first, since you brought up the rings and we have gently said they're uncomfortable. What was that like? I mean, not only because you guys kind of put together rings that were hopefully close enough to the real McCoy to prepare for this. So what was that aspect of training like, Jason?
I bought some. The first thing I did, I remember like just going to the DinnieStones.com website and reading through everything. There's a list of requirements. Like John said, you have to be able to prove that you've lifted 300 kilos from, I believe, below the kneecap level. So a pin pull deadlift from below the shins or from about shin level, which 660 pounds is a pretty heavy lift for anybody. It's a pin pull, so it's basically just saying, is your back and grip okay to do this thing? Are you going to waste our time if you come up here? And I think that they did that because it's probably happened before, or people have gotten hurt trying it that didn't need to be trying it. So you have to send off a video, and then, like you said, you got to get an approval. Well, one of the things that was so interesting to me is the equipment. Like, how am I going to train for this in Texas? I don't have anything remotely like this. So the closest thing I had was some D rings, that you use on a cable pulley. I strapped those up to as many kettlebells as I possibly could to get around a strap. And I started figuring out how would I hook grip this to hang on to them. And could I even handle the discomfort? I'm not going to say pain, the discomfort of it at first. Once I realized, okay, I can move these things off the ground. Now I need to get something more specific. And I found a site with a guy that's in Tennessee that he makes the pins that you can just set vertically with some U-shaped crevices, or I can't remember what they're called. Little U-shaped U-joints that you could hook some rings onto, and he made the rings. The problem was the rings were identical, and the Dinnie Stone's rings are not identical. The Big Stone has a bit thicker, more oval shaped ring, and then the smaller stone is more concentric circle and thinner. So they feel much different in your hand when you grip them. I knew this, and there's actually some guys, I think, in Ireland that make them now, and you can buy an actual replica set of rings. So I had a friend that makes he's a iron blacksmith, makes iron art and stuff, and I was like, can you make me something similar to this in diameter? And so he made a makeshift big ring for my big weight, and I just kept using that for my heavy stone that I would use on my pins at home to train with. It honestly only took maybe a couple weeks of tempering of the skin, the joints, the ligaments, and the getting the thumbnail used to all that pressure. And then after that, it was just can I progress through the lifts that I had planned leading up to the day I was doing it, which I don't know about John's trip, but I went and taught an SFL, a barbell certification in the UK that weekend, and then took a plane to Edinburgh the night after the SFL was over, and then had to rent a car the next morning to make it to Potarch in time at noon for my lift. So I had all these like very crazy unknowns happening. How was I going to handle the jet lag? How was I going to handle the energy level after I've taught for 3.5 days? I'd never driven in the UK on the wrong side of a car on the wrong side of the street. Is my GPS going to work? And then of course, because I've never been there before, I wanted to stop off at a couple of castles on the way there. So I'm like literally, I was at Dunatar Castle ruins near Aberdeen an hour before I did the Dinnie Stones. And to John's point too, there was no warm ups. It was me and one other guy. It was rainy, misty that day. It was like 34 degrees Fahrenheit, really cold. And it was chalk up and lift. That's what it was. It was a cold lift, literally, with no warm up. And both of us did it probably within 10 minutes of showing up.
Wow.
Yeah.
John, what were the rings and the grip and your experience like?
Sure. In some ways, I guess you could say, had a little advantage with living in the hook grip land with the Scottish Highland Games. A lot of our handles is either a D handle, which is kind of more of a barbell flat handle, but then we throw the circles for our weight over bar, and then we have sometimes weight for distance there too. So I had a little conditioning, especially with the right hand. You don't do too many events that I can think of or offhanded throws with the left handed, but sometimes. So I was able to lock in. I felt like that was an advantage, especially with that front. I picked up, of course, like most people, the front Dinnie, the big Dinnie, they call it, is the 420 that way. And I definitely wanted to train. I could go on and on about the training side of things too, but I wanted to make sure with one arm that I could pick that up. And to Jason's point, I think for me, it was a lot more painful though, too, that was pure pain in some time. Like, how much pain can you handle in that thumb with training? How much, managing that wear and tear. And I guess I was, maybe for better worse, I was throwing to train, because since I competed actually that weekend, I think my lift was on a Wednesday or Thursday, probably I think I gave myself a little more time, and then I was competing there. And Pitlochry is nearby there later on that week. So I competed and actually still did fairly well. It's kind of amazing how your body's resiliency in training, and I did the nickel stones right after that lift, like 20 minutes later. Brett Nickel, who's one of the guys who helps coordinate the lifts, super friendly, open guy. He invited me to do his stones, and those are actually, not to take anything away from the Dinnies, but they're another over 50 pounds more. I don't know if you had any experience there, Jason. I'd be curious to hear, or knowledge of that too. It just depends on schedules and all that too. He just was able to make that work between, I guess, him starting work that morning or something too. So I was able to lift those stones. 20 minutes later, I'm doing another stone, and then I'm picking up to practice for the inverse stone. Later that day, I did the invert stone. It was at a different location before, and now it's actually a beautiful spot right there at the Braemar Highland Games. So that was like my perfect day. It was just a beautiful day in the Scottish Highlands. And then I actually did one more smaller stone later that afternoon, and my beautiful wife, before we were married, hung in there through it all and just totally ate it up. And she was actually able to lift the smallest stone is 155, the Glen Quiac stone. So it's just this whole scavenger hunt. And so everything Jason says, bringing me right back to the travel part. And I had some time there the week ahead of time down in Manchester area, but to drive across the country and on the other side like that, even though I had been there the year before, it is very taxing. We did rent the second year we did the manual transmission, stick shift the whole way. So it was like 1,000 some miles up through there, and it is way different than driving, at least in parts of the US where I've driven, which is a good part of it. It is way harder, way more challenging. Just getting up the road there to the lifting spot there too is very intense, very challenging that way too. So the grip alone, yeah, was in some ways the hardest part, but knowing that I could do that with one hand, and I rigged up some similar things like with Jason too with the kettlebells, but I had a couple different Highland Games handles, and I was able to get the specs on them pretty well and find something that worked. And I think that's when the Rogue handles came out. And I will say, I believe interestingly, there are replicas of the replica Dinnies that they lift at the Arnold Festival. They have that available. And I think you can go to the Rogue headquarters there and lift those. At least you could anytime. Those are much more painful. About that too. The skinnier handles there, yeah, to a point, hand size or whatever, maybe they're able to grip. But I would choose the bigger handles to a point of. I mean, it's smaller than a barbell. Even on the big handles, quite a bit smaller. I think it's still under half an inch or so. Maybe it's 5/8 of an inch, so still smaller than even like a women's barbell, for reference for people there too.
Yeah, in reference to the grip in the hands, like my frame of reference would be nail bending, and I know that your tolerance to the amount of pressure you're putting into the nail in your hands is key to being able to successfully bend much of anything, much less getting towards the red nail and things like that. Yeah. Jason, you were about to say.
Oh, I was just saying it reminds me of just like a piece of rebar, that's a standard sized rebar it's just that thin. Yeah, but I was going to ask John what time of day his lift was.
It was right around 9 a.m. So it was kind of cold, wet. Like, all right, we're going. Yeah. I didn't have anyone else there lifting with me too, so it was all just me. And like you said, it was like 10-minute warm up. They weren't really, to a point, they're being assertive with their time and everything. And I think you did get a total of three attempts, and I could get into the story of what I attempted with that. One was with my wife on my shoulders, and I didn't quite pull that one off. I don't think that's been done with a adult on the shoulders before, so I went for that one too. But she was a cheerleader, flyer, and very petite, so we thought that would be a cool attempt. And I swear they wanted to come off the ground, but after already pulling him and holding him, like, you're pretty fried. So I was amazed. Even got 20 minutes break before I went over to do the nickel stones, which are, I think they're just under 800 pounds. They're right there. Yeah.
Wow. No, the reason I was asking that is because my lift was at noon. Okay. And, it took about 30 minutes. It was one other guy, a gentleman from about Manchester area. He's a strongman competitor, and brought like a strongman buddy with him to cheer him on. And this guy was like a monster, like 6'8", 320 pounds. Like, he's still, I think, ranked top 5 in the UK's strongest man. He's still competing and whatnot. But the guy that I lifted with, he was just kind of an amateur strongman guy. But I wanted to do the nickel stones. In fact, that was my plan. And I didn't realize how dark it got, or how early it got dark there when we were there, because it was the middle of November. And so, I mean, the sun was setting at like 3. So we didn't have time. Like, Brett was like, I got stuff to do. And Brett Nickel, by the way. And it was getting dark, and I had a 2.5 hour with no travel problems drive one way from there to Edinburgh, where I was staying. So we had to make it all the way back. And those roads out there, they're, those little bridges that, one car lane, one lane passing and stuff. I was just like, we got to get on the road and get back to Edinburgh before I get lost. So
interesting.
I was more of a time issue. But that definitely would be, if I put a regret on anything, it would be there was that. And then the second one was the grip that I used for the actual attempt. I hook gripped my front hand, and for some reason, whenever I gripped my backside with the lighter stone, I chose to do just a regular grip instead of a hook grip. And that was what made me set them down at the time that I did. I think I could have held them a lot longer if I would have hook grip both sides. So do it again. I'll go back at some point.
So the asymmetrical stance brings with it some unique challenges because it's going to offset your shoulders as well, because you have to, like, walk me through that. What is that? Because I stand in one place and move weights around all the time. But this is just unique with this, like I said, the split stance, the offset shoulders, and the asymmetrical load. How did you approach that from a training standpoint? And what did that feel like kind of in the attempt and as you started to train heavier and heavier loads in that stance and with that shoulder position? Jason?
The closest thing is to it in the barbell world is a Jefferson deadlift, where you straddle the barbell, and you can imitate it to a certain degree, but the fact that the weights are independent, then you have to start getting a little more specific in your training. I don't know if anybody's ever just walked up to them and lifted them, without any kind of specific training. And they make these pins. You could create most people, I think, before our time, before the internet and Stoneland came out, that most people were probably making their own gear and just figuring it out. But the one thing that I made sure of during training was that I was switching stances every day. So if I did whatever my heavy load was, I would make sure that I would attempt it both directions, even, just to temper my hands up as well. So I was getting the heavy load in my left hand as I was working up throughout the time frame. The one thing this asymmetrical stance gave me in terms of problems was my back was just all torqued up all the time. So I did probably spend a lot more money on chiropractor visits than I've ever done in a short window of time. But she knew what I was doing and what kind of stresses and pressures I was putting on my body. So she really understood what I needed in terms of the corrective care, and really appreciated the fact that I was trying to be symmetrical in my attempts as much as I could. And then towards the end, I realized that I really couldn't take any more than or any fewer days off between heavy attempts than 7, and I had to stretch that out. So I was like, I had to reconfigure my peaking program towards the end to allow for a 10-day period between heavy attempts, and it ended up being the right move, because by the time I got to Potarch, I was ready to go.
That's awesome. John?
Yeah, that's some good reminder, good points. I would have forgot that too. I did the same thing. I definitely changed my hand position, rotating, which, thumb, probably the thumb in some ways is the weakest link. I think for me, it really helped me realize, kind of validate that I have a more unusual, like out of the gym barbell kind of strength, which is partly what drew me to kettlebells. And I'm sure the Highland Games, like, wow, I do have this kind of whatever old man strength, this odd lifting strength too, that it doesn't show up as much on the barbell. Like, I mean, some would argue like, oh no, you're a very strong guy, but not compared to other guys that have lifted the Dinnies or that I compete with in the Highland Games. I'm very usually, and I'm a lightweight now. I competed as a heavyweight for just reference point too. I was closer to 250 pounds most of my Highland Games career, and now I had leaned down and competed for the last 6-7 years. I don't think I've been over 220 max, and I did allow myself to kind of bump up a little bit to that point. And I was competing in open class. It's all just open class over in Scotland, and we have a lot of for better or worse, subcategories and all that are different events in the Highland Games. So that was really validating to pick up, and the higher pickup point was better for me. And of course, some of this along when I'm throwing all this asymmetrical Scottish hammer odd implements, sometimes the worst thing is, especially like a heavy deadlift, for example, or too much barbell squatting. So I prefer, and that's where the kettlebell really shines for me more than ever as a master's athlete, and just being able to load that and move single limb, carry variations. I I really tried to, and sometimes without the hook grip, just partly to give the thumb a break and just give the body a little less loading. And I'd seen a lot of other lifters approach it with just lifting very high percentages of the max, or the, you know, the goal weight, of course, is 734, but I wanted to have a little more in the tank. So I did sort of break some of those rules with higher pickup points on, I like the trap bar. I was actually able to get enough weight on there too, and acquire some other steel plates. And that was actually, the more I think about it, my biggest challenge was I had a couple little platforms that I could rig up, because my handles were hard to get the right height down. So I'd be too high and I'd be picking up, and they kind of curve in your hand and they'd rock up on the handle, and you're just like, oh, it's frustrating to figure that out. You scrape it along your leg. So those handles, and I, you know, not to sound any less impressive, I guess, but some ways picking those up were harder, you know. So I think we're over prepared, and I heard a few other people, excuse me, say that too, that it's kind of a harder pickup with those plates being flat, where the stones will kind of rock up. You could definitely say that there's more at play and odd loading in that sense. So you still, and I think Jason's getting at that too, like I wanted to prepare for a lot of different variety of things too. And again, that like single arm loading, can I handle this on one arm? Where's my weakest link? Is my shoulder really a mess because of this, or my mid back? And wasn't as bad in my mid back. I was concerned having a low back history, and I'd blown 2 discs and always had a weaker link in my low back, but I was able to stay very upright. The way I approach it was much more of a wide squat stance, almost like semi sumo. I thought of it that way, and staying as upright as I could, and just slightly offsetting my body was my approach. And there's a couple different styles that seem to work. Some people will do more of a deadlift, or almost kind of weight shift onto one side, where I just wanted to stay solid and centered, and then let my arms just be hooks, and think about it like a sumo deadlift, or almost like a front squat zercher position. How keep my head, keep my shoulders upright. And thankfully on game day, they came right up the way I had hoped they would, and felt like, oh, this was actually just really how I had set this up. And they did come off the ground nicely. And again, having those handles, like, oh, these are better than I practiced with. So in some ways, having those challenges. But I did go up to, I'll admit, I went up to, I think it was 860 from like a 20, I think the handles are 21 inches and 18 inches off the ground. So fairly, quite a bit higher than a barbell pickup from a standard deadlift position, if we want to compare it to a deadlift. But I went a little higher than 20 inches and was able to pick up 860 that way. And I even did a few things with straps, because I wanted the full body experience. I wanted something you just feel like it's ripping you apart, or you're just getting stretched like Gumby or something. This out of body, very strange sensation. We all probably had that when we haven't lifted as heavy for a while. I'm thinking even last night, getting up to touching some heavier front squats, which I hadn't done really all year, haven't felt as much need or interest in that too. And just realizing, wow, this is, this old weight, which is well 100 pounds less than my previous, lifetime PR. This is a different sensation, I guess, just getting used to that sensation of the loading versus the grip in itself. And then just like, again, Jason said too, these odd, rotating the lifts, and just using all the StrongFirst principles really cleanly, and, just applying it. That was really cool to just think about it intelligently, and then allowing, again, kind of that theme of there's a rawness to it. You have to adjust a few things and be prepared for this less than perfect setup in every sense, from weather to all the other variables like we've talked about.
What's interesting, the Jefferson deadlift as a kind of a reference point, the idea that as a rotational athlete and throwing athlete, you felt like that gave you maybe a better ability to handle that asymmetrical stress, where Jason, I don't think you have that background as much as a rotational athlete or throwing athlete. So I think there's some interesting things in there. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I wonder, Jason, if like you actually would have done physically, like handled the stress of the rotation better if you, now I think you would have had a longer term price to pay, but if you'd stayed in one stance and just kind of let your body kind of adjust and adapt to that pressure in that stance, you might have gotten to the attempt and successfully and maybe handled it a little bit better, but then long term, that's not going to take you anyplace good. Like you'd have to
Right.
spend a significant amount of time unwinding after you had gotten there if you had just stuck with one stance. So I think there's some interesting wrinkles in there. And John, you mentioned the StrongFirst principles and how we approach things, and when you look at Plan Strong and Build Strong, and and then I do have a kettlebell question and correlation here in a minute, but just want to see which StrongFirst principles do you guys think were most helpful, and did you apply or look at it from a Plan Strong sort of standpoint with your training? You've already mentioned the adjustments you made towards peaking and your heavy days, Jason. Yep.
Okay, so I would say that I mean, one of the main things is just learning to peak appropriately and manage my recovery rates. But also, I did use a lot of specialized variety, which is one of our bedrocks and in our training. You want to get really good at something, you just keep practicing it. I know that some of my earlier training sessions, I was doing a lot of single hand deadlifts, just on a barbell. So, setting your hand right in the center, just kind of seeing how much I could lift with one hand and maintain posture and symmetry throughout, testing my hook grip through that. I think as I was waiting on my pins and rings to be delivered, I was just doing anything I could to try to imitate certain things, but I ended up going back to that and using some pin pulls when I would take some, I think in between my heavy pin sets, I was backing off and using pin pulls to kind of maintain some strength and hip hinge quality, also trying to, lever and brace and power breathe, just trying to stack my joints in the appropriate way and figure out where's my best wedge, and where's my strongest wedge. That's really, like John kind of I feel like we're kind of telling the same story. But that's kind of what I looked at. It was a semi-sumo deadlift, and all I had to do is get my torso as upright as possible and wedge my hips between my shoulders and my knees. And that's really what it came down to, is if I knew that my grip could hang on, which I tested it like John did, well above the Dinnie Stone weights. I think I'd loaded my pins well over 800 pounds before my trip. That was my last heavy session, because I wanted to have no doubt that the grip and the strength wasn't going to be the issue. If there was going to be any issue, it was going to be something unforeseen and out of my control, like weather or, lack of sleep or something like that. But I wanted to have a buffer there in place so that I can handle that. And, I think that all the years that I've been learning from Pavel and going through Plan Strong a few times and being able to study and understand programming as well as we do, I think that helped me tremendously. It really, my whole training time between getting I was training before I got the official invite and approval. But I want to say it was like maybe 3 to 4 months. So it wasn't particularly long in terms of like like powerlifting training cycles stretch into 6 months, years, 12-month long. You're planning stuff out really far out, and managing your training adaptations through that. This didn't feel that long to me. Now, when people ask, I've been asked that before, and I'll say, to caveat it, well, I've been training for this really my whole life. Like, it started even before I ever even lifted a barbell. I grew up on a cotton farm and was lifting hay bales and heavy cottonseed sacks when I was 8, 9, 10 years old that were heavier than I was. And so I figured out really young how to move heavy things, whether I was taught or not. And then once I got into the gym and really enjoyed it, but I wasn't particularly strong even during all of that time and well out of high school. Like, it wasn't until I was in college where I really started getting the hang and knack of strength training. But it still started then. I think that, like, that was my genesis for that penultimate point in my life where I was able to do something that, you know, is kind of a rare feat and, you know, a cool accomplishment. So it was a 35-year process, but the peaking plan only took 3 to 4 months.
Understood. John?
Yeah, I completely relate to all that too, and brings me right back. But just as much as, like I said in the beginning too, making it being as methodical as we can, but still allowing some specialized variety, you know, same but different, and just a bit of intuition. I think after, you know, 20 years of coaching, for some ways that can turn me into a mad scientist and get a little off the rails too. But just saying, I know this, just like Jason too. I've been a strength athlete for a long time. I've been quite strong, and it was actually really cool for me. I hadn't done a lot of rack pull variation type of stuff, and realizing I am actually pretty dang strong in this range, and it doesn't hurt my low back as much, at least. And that was a really cool aha, like, wow, I am really strong in this way. I'm not by any means a great deadlifter. I struggle with deadlifting because of, you know, a bunch of different things, I suppose, too, or even just some, you know, fear back in my mind still too, where thankfully now, and I'm happy to answer your kettlebell question, you go into that a little bit too, I can get away with so much less work, even on, you know, just training my weight over bar. Yesterday, I'll give away that little surprise. I'm touching on some masters records, and I have hardly touched the barbell. I alluded to that a little bit too. It's just kind of topping off the tank and little ego boost. Okay, I'm still within a reasonable range. And to that specific question, back to the Dinnies too, I wanted to stay true to the percentages for the most part. I was not touching those heavy weights very often. I think same kind of thing too. I had to look back at my notes for sure, but it was in the 7+ day range where I would touch anything above 80% and was really able to stay, you know, obviously still moving a lot of heavy weights around too, but I was waving the load that way with my percentages, and I didn't touch anything on the stones anywhere close within 2+ weeks, 3 weeks. You know, I really stayed true to that too. Just like I was peaking for a powerlifting meet or a TSC, I didn't tempt, I got to test that last little bit out. I did that test way ahead of time, meaning like a month or so ahead of time. But it is kind of funny when you think of you know, God bless the purest powerlifters that can program out for a year plus at a time. I'm not quite that, just that type of discipline, I guess, too. I love looking at the numbers in some sense, but I also want to play with some of that intuition. And I think I only had decided on it for sure and got the pins and that about 4 months ahead of time. So, you know, some people say, oh, that's cute. You did a little micro planning in there. That's not a real, you know, training block, but I had the base of that. And, you know, we could go into the details of what we think if we want to with specific lifts and that too. But I approach it a little bit more from a squat perspective. And I wasn't doing, and I don't know if Jason was too, I wasn't pulling much, and I was in the middle of my Highland Games season too, and I had been competing as a lighter weight athlete, you know, under 200 pounds. So that doesn't help in some sense. You're throwing weights all the time, but it doesn't help with those pure grind lifts. So I needed some high tension stuff in there, and I didn't want to fry my body for, you know, competition over there, which was I will honestly say almost equally as important. And again, not taking anything away from the Dinnie, but the inverse stone is right there, and that was a, you know, just traditional stone lift to shoulder is kind of the ideal coveted position. Now they have a nice plinth barrel that you can put it up on too, which is a little less stress. So I was training for that as well. So I had my grip work, my true ground work was lifting real stones. And again, it was kind of like, oh, I have this odd strength, and it actually feels better on my back generally. Until it doesn't. Nowadays, I'm really limiting those lifts after 4 years of doing it and training to go to Iceland during all the pandemic times and that. But I was finding like Zercher variation, like getting my grip out of it, trying to find some Zercher variations and even some front squats, some higher tension, getting that torso and making all the connections there too. So I was trying to, you know, ration that grip work, and especially the hook stuff, and make sure my back was going to tolerate that. So that's some, you know, other pieces. But if I remember right, there wasn't too many of these odds and ends like, whoa, I'm really getting getting into a hot zone and I'm not tolerating this well, or getting too broken down. So it went pretty well. And I was able to talk to a few other guys, but not quite the same maybe intention that I had seen and read about too. Some other guys were just, just kind of feeling out the weights and that too. I was prepping, practicing, and did playing around with reps a little bit, but a lot of it was a couple different, pick up positions, even playing around with that, and hold times. It was kind of coming into that. I'm sure Jason had the same kind of goal, and I'll make that. My reference point was the gentleman that was featured. I can't remember, maybe James, I think is his name, featured on the video. He held them for 15 seconds. So I said, oh, looking at this guy and his numbers, like my goal is to hold them at least 15 seconds. I'm gonna hold them longer than this guy if at all possible. Give me something to shoot for, because I do have that competitive nature. And I did manage to hold them miraculously 16 seconds. And I will say that was a missed opportunity, maybe because I didn't have a timer there. No one was time. I was just hearing, people cheering a little bit. And then I'm like, oh, I had this moment and I let out this kind of yell and looked up at the sky. And I'm like, I'm doing it. I think I'm at over 10 seconds. I got more time in me. And then all of a sudden, you just feel like, oh, this is just, things are getting dim and I'm going to have to put these suckers down. But it was changing some of those heights, changing some of the weights, and picking, getting some picks, getting that tension, that wedge, practicing that way. And then again, occasionally waving up to those heavier loads and making sure the positions were right and we're able to adjust those platforms. If people want to look at my Facebook, Instagram stuff, you can watch the wheels turning and looking back at some of those lifts now. I was like, oh, that's pretty ugly. That's not too pretty. But again, the game day is really what counts too. And to go in there and be able to just set up and and commence your lifts is a great feeling that we all know what that feels like, to do that well for our preparation, and maybe when things don't go quite as planned too.
So from a kettlebell perspective, I know for me, when I entered into grip training, I entered in at a pretty good level, closed a number 2 gripper, first time I ever put my hands on one, bent a 60 penny nail. I just kind of, and the guy who's having me try this stuff is like, you should do this. Like you're all right. And so I did. And that allowed me to enter in. So from a kettlebell perspective, even though the handles are thicker, obviously not the kind of direct carryover for the pain and grip tolerance that you need, but we do a lot of asymmetrical loading. We do a lot of power work. We get a lot of loading out of lower loads, so to speak, because our swings and our ballistics create a lot of virtual force into the body and the ground. Where did kettlebell training play a role in preparing you for the Dinnie Stones, and what do you think that the benefit there was, Jason?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think the grip development for sure. I mean, over the years, I've done and dabbled with quite a few, little offshoot kettlebell feats and, circus trick type stuff. And haven't not nearly got into the grip world as much as you did, Brett, but I dabble. I've been stuff when I see it, and I mean, all of that I think really helped. I think that just being a part of our community overall, like in learning about this kind of these niche strength feats and within our own culture and body of work, I think has really helped me. I really lean on my powerlifting background. I think that being a kind of built for deadlifting and understanding my leverages and understanding what the wedge is overall, being uncomfortable for a short period of time and learning how to tolerate that. I think that's all part of kettlebell training as well. The mental aspect of it anyway. I think, it was just a culmination, man. I mean, it really was. I know that the earlier the year that John and I did this, there was a Nat Geo show that took 4 of the world's strongest men around they ended up going to Potarch, and all of them attempting the Dinnies and attempting the original feat, which was to carry them across the Potarch Bridge, which is like, 17 feet wide. It's, about as wide to get a car through it. Brian Shaw, I think, was the closest to getting to replicate it, and he still had to put them down like after 11 feet. So it was kind of cool to see how hard it was for even those guys who, every one of them is 6'5" or bigger. Eddie Hall was there, Brian Shaw, Robert Obrist, and Pete Seddon, I think, was the fourth.
Mm-hmm.
All these guys are
Nick Best.
Nick Best. Sorry, Pete and Seddon had
That's
done it on his own.
Good,
He done it
good
on
memory
his own.
though. Yeah, good reminder. That's a great reference for people to see as well. That definitely validated me, and they were just all just hating it, maybe dramatizing it a little bit, but their hands were just toast.
Right. So just being amongst that, and this kind of offshoot outside the kettlebell question, but when you accomplish this, you get to put your name in a paper leather bound ledger that they keep in the vault at the Potarch Cafe, and they bring it out only for these occasions to allow the successful lifters to sign it. They get you put the number that you are in the order that's been lifted in, and you get to print and sign your name, and they write out to the side what you did with the stones, whether you did a traditional farmer side-by-side deadlift with it, or the asymmetrical one, and how long you held it. So it's really cool to be a part of that history, and that book, both of our names are in it. A couple of our StrongFirst brothers and friends are in it now, and that book is gonna outlast us, and people will be able to look back and hey, I know that guy. So it was really cool. And John, I don't know if you're familiar with this story too. I found this out well after I'd been to Potarch, but the a gentleman named David Prowse, he lifted the Dinnie Stones in the 60s, 1965. And if you're a Star Wars buff, you'll know who David Prowse is. He's the actor who played Darth Vader in the first three trilogy, the Star Wars movies in the 70s. And since he's a British man, he was a power lifter and strongman. And I think George Lucas had seen him, and he really originally was wanting to cast for Chewbacca, but he's like, no, you walk like Darth Vader. You're going to be Darth Vader. Well, when he was in the original cuts of the movies, he's speaking the lines. And so in the original uncut, unedited versions, there's this very gentlemanly British accent coming out of Darth Vader, which is really weird because all of us are James Earl Jones fans and know that that's Darth Vader's voice. But anyways, he actually lifted the Dinnie Stones, I think, 5 different occasions, and every one of them were strapped, meaning he was wearing lifting straps in order to hold on to the handles. And so doing an unassisted, unstrapped variation of the lift is really kind of the pinnacle. And then if you can hold on to them for a period of time, it's even more. And if you could carry them, walk with them, it's even bigger. But John and I are both stronger than Darth Vader. That's the whole point of that story.
I love it.
There you go.
I love it.
Nice. Can't top that. That's awesome.
John, what was your kettlebell carry in or transfer and everything?
Yeah, I'm also gonna say that's a great question, and the kettlebell has been with me just for so long as well. In some ways, it's hard to maybe articulate that or go imagine my life without the bells in a cheesy way, but it's really true. For me overall, I will definitely say my bridge between the Highland Games and the traditional barbell, or looking, taking that more unconventional approach, it really has helped put me together. Like you talk about the virtual forces, absolutely you can very much see that, or we've talked about that too in past training and articles and things I've done, and applying that to, it's basically a kettlebell you're throwing over a bar, or a kettlebell you're throwing for distance. So it just made so much sense to me in the Scottish Games. But again, the Dinnie Stones are just a very different beast. You know, they're so much high tension and wedging and just creating those optimal angles too. So I'm definitely going to say just things like being able to organize yourself under, I think we probably all know what having double 48s in the rack position feels like, and squatting with those. That's a amazing skill and ability to coordinate that, or even a single 48. That's harder than a lot of people realize. If you can do 10 squats, I think that's a Jeff Newport standard that of course I had to test this last year or something like that too. Like, how can I still get that 48 in the rack and squat with it? That odd, loading under still high tension without those so much of that, just the bell projecting out front like a swing, but definitely the grip over time, and seeing like you had talked about the grippers. I was able to close the number twos after doing a bunch of kettlebell training, but I remember I'd geeked out in the clinic and would test my grip. I'm like, oh, I'm really not that strong. Like in the early 2000s, when I didn't have my, as much of my purpose into this strength board, to kind of just start to believe that the games help bring that out of and the bell and some of my good coaches along the way. Like, you do have this unique real life strength. You're not a traditional gym numbers guy, as I've said many times already in this interview, but just putting that pieces together and those odd lifts, and even more than ever, it's different single leg kickstand type of variations, picking up rows, things like that are just make more sense than ever, and keep me connected, and I don't have to get under that heavy barbell as often, or really at all. Part of me is just like, I don't need this ever again. I think I could go in probably today and go pull the Dinnies, even though I don't think I could deadlift anywhere close to 500 pounds. I could organize myself, and I've done a couple of those tests. We actually did replicate the one with my wife on the home pins when we were doing a Highland Games clinic, and some single arm stuff that's pretty funny I could share with you guys too, or she's like sitting on the pins there too, and this that kind of fun stuff. So just being able to, I guess it's kind of like the Matrix or something, where you just like download that file and your brain already has it in there, and the bells and the barbell and all these other things that we've done and trained for over the years, and just apply that, kind of upload the file and go and do it, which I just, again, hard to imagine not having that, but I don't think that that's a common thing with someone who hasn't put in thousands and thousands of reps and hours on these, all different skills of strength, really.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I think if I give us free reign here, this will be a 6 to 8 hour conversation, right? And people will have to do it in installments. But for now, couple of things: the rawness that you guys talked about, the reality of the day, like you had to adjust and overcome, both of you, on the day of the attempts. There were some things to overcome, and you had the mental and physical wherewithal to make it through that. Really interesting aspects of the training and how you approached it. And oddly enough, the 3 to 4 month windows that you guys talked about in ramping up to peaking for something like this actually makes a lot of sense to me. I went from starting male bending to hitting the red nail in about 6 months. And so that sort of 4 to 6 month time frame to really peak up. Now, not going to stay there. They call it a peak for a reason. That makes a lot of sense, just because of the loading that you're taking, and the way, Jason, you talked about it a lot, just how it affected your body getting prepared to take that on. So fascinating stuff. Love to hear about the specialized variety. I think that's something that I really heard strongly, and it's just what an accomplishment. So hopefully this has been fun for you guys to kind of throw your mind back there and think about the experience. And like as you said, now I got to go get Brett Bracken on an interview, and then talk to Sven, maybe get them on a partnered up interview, so that we can get the all of those stories recorded as well. So Jason, any final thoughts? What I know you're probably feeling all, as you said, misty or fuzzy?
Warm and fuzzy.
Yes.
Warm and fuzzy. Very few things get me there, but the reminiscing about the Dinnies, that's definitely one of them. I'll probably go watch Stoneland tonight or this weekend, and get a box of tissues.
Love it. Love it, John.
Yeah, just how that's such that day was just my best day of all the lifting things I was able to do. Just such a memorable thing, and it inspired me to do. I've written an ebook and a program based with sandbags. We call them soft stones through Original Strength. So I wrote a book on it too. I was so inspired after doing all that, and just continuing to expand, inspire others along the way, and just being part of that history. Just like, I guess, going back to the bell for a second too, just that rich history and physical culture. That's the deeper place, and just that kind of realization that, like Pavel says, that strength, the attitude of strength, something you can carry around, kind of that quiet place where it's not a just typical barbell strength. And having my contractor come over the other day and say, "Oh, I saw you online. I saw you lifting those massive stones." And I think if it was a barbell, he wouldn't have been as impressed by it somehow, or just that uniqueness and, again, the rawness of it. I think that's really just a special opportunity. Let's say from there, and just be able to go across the pond there to the UK and travel around, like just this, adult, like Indiana Jones type of thing. As the new Indiana Jones is coming out too, I'm like, this is the closest thing, this like treasure hunt and this history is just so cool.
I'm immediately picturing the red line going across the the map and taking you to the UK and Scotland. Had to fit a movie reference in there at some point. And now, if you've seen the movie, hopefully everybody in their mind is now seeing this red line go across the map and picturing John and Jason on their journeys. Well, again, gentlemen, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, sharing your stories, and congratulations again for being part of an elite group that has achieved the putting wind beneath the stones, as I believe they say. So for all of you listening, thank you so much for hopping on the StrongFirst YouTube channel here, and wishing you all the best. And just remember, strength has a greater purpose.